of such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, under the rule before us today, we will choose between two starkly different visions for America. My Democratic colleagues and I are proposing a simple and fair tax cut for the middle class. This proposal has already passed the Senate. If passed by the House, the legislation could quickly become law. Our tax cut is based upon a simple premise that it is time for the wealthy and corporations to pay their fair share, no more, their fair share. Unfortunately, despite agreeing with the tax cuts proposed in our bill, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are standing in the way of the tax cut becoming law. Instead of passing a common-sense tax cut, the majority is demanding that any tax cut for the middle class be accompanied by an additional tax cut for the richest 2%. Their proposal is based upon the disproved theory of trickle-down economics, a failed economic theory that has led to record inequality and a broken tax code that is riddled with loopholes and giveaways to the wealthy. For decades, our tax system has been tilted in favor of the wealthy and the big corporations, a rigged system that isn't working for most Americans. As just one example, between 2008 and 2010, 30 profitable Fortune 500 companies paid absolutely nothing in federal taxes. And many more companies and wealthy individuals avoid paying taxes by sheltering the money in bank accounts overseas. This stands in sharp contrast to other moments in American history. In the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, a 30-year period that saw the creation of the middle class and the realization of the American dream, top income tax rates often reach levels we wouldn't even dream of today. But despite these tax rates, we saw incredible economic growth and the creation of the strongest middle class on earth. The middle class grew in part because we did not allow the most successful members of our society to dodge their responsibility as American taxpayers. In years since, we've witnessed a purposeful and concerted effort by some to undermine the notion of shared responsibility which this government was based on. In years since, we've witnessed a purposeful and concerted effort to undermine that, starting with, quote, Reaganomics, end quote, in the 1980s. A new theory pervaded American politics, a belief that our focus should really be on helping corporations and the wealthy in hopes that they might, in return, help some of us. Many on the other side of the aisle subscribe to this idea and believe that by providing for the powerful interest first, success would trickle down onto the middle class. What we now know is the theory is simply not true. Today, America is increasingly unequal. Millions of jobs have been shipped overseas. The middle class has been gutted. These results are strong evidence that trickle-down economics have completely and utterly failed. In 2001, President Bush proposed a series of unpaid-for tax cuts that exploded our deficit and put millions of dollars directly into the pockets of the richest families in America, and that's where we are today. At the same time, President Bush claimed that these tax cuts would create jobs, and Vice President Cheney told us not to worry about the cost to the nation because, quote, deficits don't matter, end quote. A decade later, we could see that President Bush and Vice President Cheney couldn't have been more wrong. Under President Bush, our deficit exploded to record levels, and according to Fact Check organization, he created only 1.1 million jobs. In contrast, President Clinton erased our deficit through the balanced tax plan and created 23 million jobs. Quite a difference. Which brings us back to the legislation. Today, the majority proposes we continue the failed policies by extending the Bush tax cuts for the richest 2%. Doing so, Madam Speaker, would cost us nearly $1 trillion over the next 10 years. And it would force us to continue borrowing billions of dollars from China and force us to make cuts in vital programs like Medicare and student loans. To continue the failed status quo is a disservice to the American people that we represent. It is high time that we started making the tax code fair for those who work hard and play by the rules, not just the wealthy who lobby hard and rewrite the rules. We can do that by passing a simple and fair tax cut for the middle class today. Unlike the proposal from the majority, the Democrat proposal to cut taxes for the middle class is something that both sides already agree on. The majority strategy of holding middle-class tax cuts hostage in exchange for the tax cuts for the top 2% is outrageous, and it must end. Far too often, the majority has pursued a partisan and zero-sum ideology that led this Congress down dead-end roads. We've seen it over and over again, whether it's the majority's proposal to end Medicare as we know it, or inability to avoid a downgrade, the first in our nation's history and in our credit. Unfortunately, their proposal today is yet another partisan piece of legislation that will never become law. Indeed, the President has already said that he will veto the majority's proposal if it ever reaches his desk. When faced with these two starkly different proposals, one, non-controversial and a common-sense tax cut for the middle class, the other, a partisan tax cut to benefit the richest 2%, it's clear what we should do. I urge my colleagues to provide a fair and simple tax cut to all Americans because the rich will benefit too, while standing up for the financial security and prosperity of the middle class. Why would we continue a program we know has failed? I reserve the balance of my time.
The lady reserves her time. The gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to make sure that I note once again, reinforce the